Okay, so I'm Matthew Schutte. I'm here with Michael Mansour. Is that how I pronounce your name, Michael?
You got it.
And we're just going to gab, basically, right?
Okay.
You had approached me at a Bitcoin event earlier this week with one of the Bitcoin core devs, right?
Yeah, we had Peter Willey talking about his key tree signatures.
Pretty awesome. And you had seen me talk at a previous Bitcoin meetup, is that right? From a few months ago, was doing the Revoke SSL.
Yep, you had came and given a talk at my meetup that I organized, and I'm actually probably prepared. And let me find another space. I keep getting like moved around in rooms, so I'm just going to go out into a public space where I can't be booted.
Okay, no worries. So I'll just frame it as Michael organizes the SF Bitcoin meetup, and a couple months ago, I presented there with a friend and partner of mine, Christopher Allen, a little project that we're working on called Revoke. Right now, it's called Revoke SSL. We're probably changing that name, but and that was essentially a little project where we're using the blockchain to create an independent revocation service for SSL security certificates. Basically, there's a problem in internet security, and we think we found a little hack that solves that problem. So we were doing a presentation on that, and I think in the middle of that presentation, or at the end of the presentation, I went off on a rant of some sort.
You did. You talked about policy, privacy and accountability, and how what's the need for intense privacy if there's if you're able to revoke access that you give people.
Yeah, so I chatted on some sort of political philosophy stuff, which is basically what I do, right? Like I'm a political philosopher. Whoa. And so when I bumped into Michael this last Tuesday, Monday.
Monday.
When I bumped into Michael on Monday, he was like, "Hey, I would love to hear more of that." And I said, "Great, let's do a recording." So, because that's kind of my default. So we can dive into anything. Is there? Don't worry about them. Like, if this will probably be a lot of me talking. Really,
Perfect.
like you'll ask a question, and then we'll put you on mute, and I'll chat a bunch. And then when you want to ask another question, just unmute yourself and speak, and so the audio will sound good that way.
Yeah, absolutely. Let me get my dog. Beatrice, come here. Come here. Beatrice. Come on. She was off leash in a room with me, and then I quickly came here. Beatrice, come here. Beatrice.
Can we see Beatrice?
Yeah.
Hey, Beatrice.
Beatrice used to be a breeder for guide dogs for the blind.
Oh, wow.
And now she's not in the program anymore. She finished up. She had a couple litters, and they got all they needed from her. So she's produced a couple of dogs that work now.
Awesome. That's super awesome. Yeah. Wow.
So if you could talk about more about the philosophy about the need for privacy if we're able to revoke access. I remember one of the examples you gave was with email contact information. If you're able, people are hesitant to give out their information because they don't want people to contact them more than once. So you are more likely to give it out or not give out a burner email if you can say, okay, I got the 2 emails I need from you, and you turn it off.
Yeah. Yep. Yeah, so that's actually a project that I'm working on at the moment as well. But the basic idea, and this isn't just email, but this is true for everything else. The basic idea is there are a variety of approaches to security, right? We make decisions about. I'm gonna take a step back actually. A really important point, and Christopher Allen, my partner, is very aware and conscious of this, but it's something that I don't think the general world is. And that is that trust is not a binary thing. Trust is something that happens in a graduated way. So It's not this is a stranger, and stranger. Okay, I've never met them before, but I'm going to decide we're going to have babies together, right? You're in my life forever. We're united. No, that's not how it happens, right? There's a gradual process of making yourself vulnerable, a little bit vulnerable. And then that other person either, holding that vulnerability and taking good care of you, or not, and violating the trust that you had given. And so trust is really something that happens in this kind of spiral way, this step-by-step way of, I made myself vulnerable, you were nice to me, you made yourself a little vulnerable. And we do this back and forth dance that enables us to build up a history and a mutual understanding and a mutual shared worldview about who we are in relation to one another, how we will behave, and we build credibility over time. We literally, through our actions, change the way that other person perceives us, to a point where at some point we might have so much trust that, in a really intimate relationship, in a marriage that's been around for a long time, your identity actually has shifted. Identity is not something that is, this is my physical body. No. Identity is a perception. It's a perception of self, and it deals with how you define yourself. And at one level, trust deals with you making somebody else a little part of you, right? Like you go, I am willing to rely upon that person to help me make decisions in the world. I'm going to extend my capacities, my capabilities in ways that make me dependent upon them. But that's a very risky thing. It's a vulnerable thing. And as a result, that's why we do that step-by-step approach.
Now,
it has to be carefully managed. Yeah.
Is the identity you're speaking about, is it like singular, or can individuals have multiple identities in which they share with people?
You tell me.
So you might have, I would imagine that absolutely, people have one identity they share with a certain individual and another identity with another individual, and I think it depends on maybe what they're trying to get out of a relationship.
Absolutely, right? And we perceive ourselves in context, right? In this context, I play this role. I should behave this way, right? Those other people should behave this way, right? In this context, you are a customer and you are outside the company. There are certain secrets that I probably shouldn't share with you. That would be a violation of the trust of the company to tell you all of my pricing information for my vendors, because it gives you greater, so at the same time, if you were inside the company, very different. It's okay for me to share that stuff with you. And we usually, people, they misunderstand identity as well, right? People think of identity as like, I am me. An identity is just a token that attaches to me. Wrong. And it's hard to see why that's wrong, but really at the end of the day, when you dive very deep into this, when you get into the philosophy, the reason it's wrong is that the lie that is based upon, it's a useful lie, but the lie that it's based upon is that we are separate, right? And I saw the little like, what?
Who is we?
Humans, a physical object, right? I'll give a quick example. Give me 1 second. Give me 1 second. Okay. So a really useful lie, but one that, again, is inaccurate. I won't call it a lie. I'll say a useful inaccuracy, right, is math. We normally think of math as true. Math is not true.
I love that. That's what my master's is based on.
Yeah. And math is wonderful, right? It's really useful, and it's not true. And I'll start with this. Math exists. It's an abstract thing. And as an abstraction, it's useful. But that abstraction is also meant to represent reality, or we use it to try to represent reality. But in that bridge, that jump from abstraction to reality, there's a gap, right? And when we move from the abstraction of numbers to reality, there's a little shift that happens that we tend not to notice, but it makes all the difference. So I went to look for something that would make me be able to do this example. I have 1 sand dollar. Okay. I have 2 sand dollars. I have 3 sand dollars. Okay. Counting, really useful. What's the lie? That this is 1 sand dollar. That this is a 1. That this is a thing that is separate from the world around it, that is divorced and separable from that world around it. That it is an entity. Now that's true at one level. It has coherence. The different parts of this sand dollar, all the little structures and the molecules and everything, they've all been built up and combined in ways that are useful. And they work together as a unit, and you can pick that thing up without picking up the things around it, right? But it's not actually separate from that rest of that world. There's heat transferring from it. There's molecules. There's electrons. Now, those things are happening at a level at which my human senses aren't able to pick up on it directly. We've built tools that allow us to observe that stuff, right? But the boundary is blurry. It's not useful for us to pay attention to that blurriness of that boundary in most cases. It's really useful to treat it as if it's a completely separate thing, because for our purposes, it is a separate thing, right? When I say, hey, give me 1 sand dollar, someone's able to pick up one of these, and the others don't just drag along with it, right? And so that's a useful thing, to just ignore the fact that that sand dollar is constantly shifting. It's flowing. There's things going into it and things coming out of it. We think of organisms as things that are different from the rest of everything else because they eat, poop, and reproduce, right? And the real important part here is reproduce, and that is a difference. But everything else eats and poops too. This eats and poops heat. It eats and poops electrons. It eats and poops, all of these other things. And when it's in this form, it's useful for me to call it a sand dollar and to call it 1 sand dollar. But that's not true. That's not a full description of what's going on there. It's a partial description of what's going on there. It's a description that pays attention to one coherence layer, the layer of the sand dollar, and ignores the layer of the parts inside that sand dollar, and it ignores the ecosystem within that sand dollar exists and the interactions that are happening between those different layers. No matter what you look at in the physical world, you're looking at both an individual, this is a unit, it's not to be divided. You're looking at an organization or an organism, something that is made up of smaller parts. So you could say, oh, this has a center, and then it has these like ring parts, and it has a top, right? And there's these channels, we can describe them in some way. Humans, we've got a heart and a lungs, and each of those is an organism on its own. It's related to the other stuff, but it's an organism on its own. And those parts together end up making up a human, right? So you have an individual, you have an organization, so a group of other individuals. You also have an ecosystem. Well, from the perspective of the heart has other parts inside of it too. And each of those parts, if you combine them all, they make up a heart. But from the perspective of that part, the human as a whole is an ecosystem. Right? From some little ventricle, from its perspective, the heart is an organization, and the human as a whole is an ecosystem. And beyond that human, the world that it exists in is a larger ecosystem. This is a fractal pattern that repeats constantly throughout nature, right? Math ignores all of that when it says, this is a 1. It ignores that relationship and the flows of energy and other materials and forms of energy. Like matter is basically energy structured in certain ways, right? It doesn't pay attention to that at its basic level. Now, then we can come up with math to try to represent those other things. But at the basic level of just counting, which is the fundamental concept upon which all other math is based, you know, that this one thing is separate from that one thing, it's a false claim. A useful claim, but a false claim. Evolution doesn't care about truth. So what exists in the world today is not necessarily what is true. Evolution cares about useful. It's useful to perceive this as a separate thing because it allows us to take action and communicate and all those other things. Math is useful. Calling it a sand dollar instead of having to describe it and having no way to recognize that, hey, these two things are similar, that's useful. Language is useful, but language is not an accurate representation of reality. Language is a tool, and language is not definitional. Language is associational. Language is not about this thing distinct from the rest of the world. We use it to try to accomplish that. It helps us create shared meaning amongst individuals by defining things, but that definition, literally the drawing of lines between one thing and another, is though it's a useful tool, it's not how language actually works. Language works through association.
It's funny, yeah. Language, if you take the English language, it has about 500,000 unique words in it. So that represents like a 500,000 dimensional vector space. But the world in which we live in could be considered, you know, it's uncountably infinite and continuous. So you're trying to project an infinite dimensional vector space onto a more perceivable, limited vector space.
That's right.
That abide by self-defined rules.
And those words are not single units. So yes, there's 500,000 words, but each of us understands those words a little differently. So the word cell phone, we usually try to come up with a definition of cell phone. But what is cell phone really? Well, for you, cell phone is probably the general abstract concept of cell phone, but also the cell phone that you own, right? It's also maybe some frustration around cell phones, like, fuck, I wish I had better service, right? So there's emotional things that are associated with that. I mean, a better example is snake. For my girlfriend in college, snake was not just an animal. Snake was an emotional reaction, right? If we were walking along in a video store, back in those days, you had video stores like Blockbuster, right? And if she saw something that was like a stick or looked at all snake-like, she would literally go and shudder. That's not a definition. It's an association. Our brains have neural networks and pathways, and we see something and we perceive, oh, is that this pattern? And that pattern is associated with, through these neural networks, all kinds of other things, which lead us to interpret that. But each of our mental maps, each of those neural paths, those physical architectures in our brains, they are different for each of us. The point of dictionaries and definitions and conversation is to create shared meaning so that we can actually try to work together to coordinate in some way where we are communicating, like actual things that are useful are being shared and not just, you're saying these words and I'm not receiving them, right? I'm perceiving just gobbledygook. When you can't speak a foreign language, you're like, I have no idea what's going on. You're saying things, but I don't understand. Just stop. You might pick up on the emotion, right? There may be some meaning that's getting conveyed, but sometimes you misinterpret that emotion because somebody else speaks in a way, and just the way their language sounds very angry to you, right? And so you're thinking, oh, is that person angry? No, that's just how you say that thing. right? Their way of using tone could be different. But at the end of the day, it's not a 500,000 vector thing. It's, again, that times the number of people. There is no single tablet in the sky that we're all downloading our information from. Words do not have inherent meaning. They are always interpreted, and they are interpreted through the lens of our experience, both direct and indirect. That experience is represented in the cumulative, physical structure of the brain, basically, right? That's our storage system, and that physical structure is both a result of our genetic history, what we ate yesterday, how much sleep we got today, because it's not just like what's the neuroprocess, it's also what are the neurotransmitters available. Is dopamine present in the brain, and in what amounts, right? Like me, I have really great memory when I've slept a ton and I don't have much dopamine going on. But if I haven't slept much, or if I surfed 50-foot waves yesterday, if I came up with a brilliant insight, or I met a cute girl, like I'm high, it's almost like I'm on cocaine or something, and I'm confident and I'm creative and I'm super able to see all these connections. I can't remember shit. I can't keep maintain a train of thought for anything. I can't remember names at all. Give me sleep, totally different story. Put me into a depression, I can remember everything. I can't motivate, I'm not creative, I'm super depressed, right? But I can remember, I could read, I could research. There's these other things that I can do. I literally have a different brain at that moment. And so the long story short is these things shift, and they shift constantly. And my work, my real life's work stuff has to do with designing a universal information architecture to enable societies to self-regulate at global scale. Small task, I do that on Thursdays, between beers. No. And it's a really fun project, but what that made me do, setting that out as my ambition, basically 8 or 9 years ago, made me search for, wait, what is real? How does knowledge actually work? How does language work? What is the truth about ecosystems? What is the truth about, why are we like this? And that's all just been an incredibly joyful pursuit, right? That has not been painful. There's been times where it was painful. I felt so much weight because I felt like, wow, this work that I'm doing, it could literally change the world. And not change the world in wow, we have a shiny new toy, change the world, but fundamentally change the way that humans relate to one another. And that was wonderful in that it gave me clarity. It seemed much easier to turn down job opportunities where I could make good money, but I wouldn't be doing this. And it was also terrible because it gave me such a strong sense of duty that for a long time, I felt guilty when at play. I would go surfing, and I'd feel bad that I had surfed because I wasn't getting my very important work done, right? And I felt like, man, I've been given so many lucky breaks. Definitely more than my fair share, and that guy's fair share, and probably those 10 people's fair share, right? I didn't do anything to deserve the way my head works. That was gifted to me. I didn't do anything to deserve parents that didn't beat me. I didn't do anything to deserve free tuition. I got free tuition because my dad happened to be a disabled veteran. So I got to go to college without having to worry about, how am I going to pay for this? And I got to go to law school the same way. And I had business mentors that just showed up and said, hey, I want to help. I've had so many lucky breaks that to not make that contribution, to have seen, wow, I think I see an answer. I think I see a way to enable society to regulate itself functionally, despite its enormous size, despite the fact that we now operate at a size that we were not built to operate at. We don't have the built-in tools.
So tell me more about this model for self-regulation.
Okay. Well, let me wrap up that point, and then I'll get into how that works. The long story short was I thought I had found it, and I was like, if I don't build this, I'm going to have real regrets. I will have not done my duty, right? To have given that opportunity and to have been given all those lucky breaks, I felt like I needed to balance the scales. That was totally destructive, right? It led me to beat myself up for years. It led me to feel guilty and lonely for a really long time. And it also involved me buying into a lie that I was the only one who could see this. Why did I buy into that lie? Because everybody I talked to about it was like, huh? You know, they literally, nobody I talked to was anywhere close to there, right? I had strung together so many different steps to get to where I was. I was off in a foreign land, and occasionally I had people who were like fans. They were like, wow, that's really interesting. That's cool stuff. I would never think about something like that. But I never had fellows. I never had people who were like, yes, we're in that territory too. Until about 4 years ago, I landed in San Francisco, and I found people who were fellows. You know, I had a business partner about 8 years ago that I tried to do essentially a graph database project with, because I knew that in order for me to do this stuff, I needed that kind of system. Like that was necessary for this stuff to work the way I wanted it to. And that project didn't work out, but that was one person who at least from the information systems should work this way, he was aligned. But long term, the bigger stuff, not so much. And his interests weren't there. But when I got here, I found people who, from a variety of different places, from a variety of different perspectives, were aiming in some way for a similar goal. It might be just that they were like, publication should work differently, or security should work differently, or privacy should be, or the way that we do, domain name system stuff, it's all wrong. It's centralized. It shouldn't be centralized. And they were passionate about it. And I realized I'm no longer alone. I've found fellows, and I can let go of all that weight, all that feeling like I have to do this alone. And if I don't, like the real worry, I'm a big wave surfer, and I had a scare a couple of years ago, 3 years ago, where if I had been 4 feet further back than I was, there's a decent chance I would have drowned. I barely got underneath a very large wave, and when I watched the video online the next day, because it got published on the most widely used surfing website, I went, whoa, that was heavy. Like in the moment, it didn't seem that heavy, but afterwards I was like, oh my God, I could have died. And I spent there was a huge swell coming, and I had 3 days where I was going, should I stop surfing big waves? And the thought wasn't, I don't want to die. The thought was, fuck, I hope I don't die before I'm able to share what I've figured out. And I grappled with that a little bit, and then eventually I realized, you know what? No, this is okay. And this has to do with my background. I was raised as a Christian Scientist, and I was like, no, you know what? I don't have to accept that limitation. And I was able to get back in the water. And after that, I was actually able to surf Mavericks in a way that was fear-free for most sessions. Probably too fear-free, to be totally honest, but that was a big transformation for me. And shortly after that was when I realized, no, I've got fellows. It's time for me to start reaching out. I'm not the only one that has to do this. And I had been so worried about getting it right, and so worried about taking money from the wrong sources and it being steered, into just a great advertising platform instead of what I thought it really could be, that I had been like this. I'd been holding it close to my chest and talking with people about it, but not really going, okay, world, here we go. Right now,
You weren't letting yourself be vulnerable, is what it sounds like.
I was not letting myself be vulnerable. That's exactly right.
Eventually just said, fuck it, let's roll with something and see what happens.
And
if you've been fortunate enough and all the right opportunities have come, why won't they come again? You just have to have, it's not faith, but just roll with it.
And it wasn't that I was worried about like not getting the money or not getting famous or whatever. I've got friends who are famous. That sucks. Like, I'm willing to endure fame if I have to get this thing like to where it needs to be. But that is definitely not the goal, right? Fame sucks. Fame basically means you no longer have control over your own life in the sense of privacy. You know, like I can pick my nose, right? And nobody gives a fuck. It doesn't come back to haunt me 3 weeks from now. Maybe one guy sees me. My buddy Adam, he's a musician. He's a famous musician. He picks his nose. It's on the cover of a magazine, you know? And he hears about that shit for a month. No, thank you. That doesn't look awesome to me at all. You know, so you know what? I'm going to pick my nose right now so that if I do ever get famous, y'all know I pick my nose sometimes. You know, sometimes I don't have a handkerchief. I had other friends who were rich, like really rich, like billionaires rich. That doesn't look that great either.
I'm just going to let you know, I don't know if you care, but there may be like people behind me who saw you on full screen. Just
don't care. Don't care. I'm going to publish this video, right? So everybody's going to see this. In fact, I would like the world to know that I poop and pick my nose. And sometimes I swear, and sometimes I make jokes that are inappropriate, and you know, because I'm human, and it's life. So if I can immunize myself, like I think that when I start to share this stuff in a big way, yeah, I might gain some recognition, which I don't necessarily want, but if I can at least, you know, temper the expectations about how abnormal I am, and I can keep that a little, okay, maybe I get to, you know, not have to have my guard up all the time. So anyway, long story short, that was really freeing. I had made that decision that, okay, it's time to be vulnerable. It's time to share. Like, I think I've figured out how I'm going to be able to share, and something that had to do with, oh, maybe we could structure this as a B Corp. Like, it had to do with structuring the relationships between who is going to contribute and how are we going to invest. And you know, I was struggling to figure that out for a long time, and I started to come to an answer. And then I met some people who were aligned, not on this project in particular, but just how they thought about the world and life and living life and joy and surfing and kite surfing. And there was a friend named Corwin Hardham who was part of this community, and he was just an amazing human being he owns this communal living space with like 10 people, and they do dinners every Friday night, and he surfs, and he's the CEO of a company that's changing the world of clean energy, and he's a brilliant mechanical engineer, and you know, just the whole 9 yards. And he and I made a deal. I was going to teach him how to surf big waves, and he was going to teach me how to kite surf. And in October, so almost 3 years ago, October of 2012, like we woke up. I crashed at their place after a Friday night dinner, and woke up and had breakfast with him and his girlfriend Gia. And he said, "Hey, you should come to dance with us." And I said, I can't. I've got some work stuff I want to do, but maybe next week. He's like, "Yeah, you should definitely come next week. It's an amazing class. You'll love it." I was like, "Okay." He's like, "And we're going kite surfing this afternoon. If you want to come, you should do that." And I was like, I've been wanting to kite surf for like years, and I've bought equipment at like a garage sale, and I've tried to go on my own, but I'm struggling. I would be stoked. Let me see if I can finish my work, and I'll try to make it to the beach and go out with you. Long story short, I finish the work, I go to the beach, he gives me a kite surfing lesson. It's amazing. He like teaches me the way that I've always been taught, you know, or I've always taught others. And I'd never really been on that side of the equation before, and it felt good. Like, it felt good to be in that position, but it also felt good to have my way of teaching be validated, right? To have that feel good told me, oh wow, having taught other people this way feels good, right? He had full trust in me. He was like, "You're great, just do this a little bit." Okay, I'm gonna go kite for a bit. And he took off. And I was just there to play and drag myself along by a kite in the water. And at the end of that day, it was like, wow, this is awesome. I crashed my kite and it like deflated. I thought I had popped it, but the pressure valve had come undone, and the air all rushed out. And we were like, cool, this will be great. Like, and I literally drove away thinking, oh my God, this is amazing. Like, I'm going to go on all kinds of adventures with these folks. We're going to build amazing things together. Like, I've found my fellows. Right? Like, literally, it was like, I found my fellows. And 3 days later, Corwin passed away. He was at his office. I believe he was meditating, which he did daily. And his heart skipped a beat and didn't restart. At least that's my understanding of it. He was 38. He was brilliant. He was an athlete. He was the most like full of life person you've ever met. And it hit me hard. And even though I'd only known him for like 3 weeks, I was like, oh my God. And in the aftermath of that, I became close with his girlfriend and the other people in his house. And I got to learn a lot about Corwin. And his death did a couple of things. One, it helped. It reminded me, hey, life is short, so get on with it. You never know, right? And the Mavericks thing was still fresh in the memory. Yeah, I could die next winter, so I better get this stuff out before I do. And the second thing was that I had done it the wrong way before. I for most of my life, I've been pretty smart and capable and all that, and so I tried to do everything myself. And I played the stoic, that needs to get done. Let me throw that over my shoulder too. Oh, no worries, I can handle that, right? And I had completely burnt out, and I'd been miserable and depressed. And part of that had to do with the fact that I was working on running an investment firm and surfboard stuff when I really deep down wanted to be doing this internet stuff, right? But a big chunk of it had to do with me not knowing how to delegate and taking myself too seriously. And one of the things that Corwin was amazing about was he brought joy into work in the way that he joked. He baked bread for people. He would harangue them to come on kite surfing trips and to come to these Friday night dinners. And I had figured out, a year or two earlier that I don't want to be a martyr anymore. Being a martyr, trying to push this ball up the stone up the hill alone, A, I'm never going to get there, and B, is that really how you want to spend your life? No. You think anybody else wants to spend their entire life like that? No, they might be willing to do it for a while, 6 months, a year, a couple of years, but eventually they're going to go, wait, hold on, there's more important stuff than just this. I want to enjoy my life. I want to spend time with my sweetheart and my kids, and I want to see the world, and I want to do all these other things. And what I realized was if I didn't build it based on joy, I was going to do it alone and I was going to fail. And so I went, okay, I want to follow. I had already figured some of this stuff out ahead of time, but I hadn't had enough conviction to actually act on that. And after Corwin passed away, I finally got enough conviction to actually act. And one of the other things that he did that was great was he really understood a principle that I teach a lot. And this is, my bills get paid largely from doing consulting work with large corporations. Startups sometimes too, but usually it's publicly traded companies who are trying to figure out how to be innovative in a changing environment. How can they balance innovation and execution in a world that's changing so fast that their existing structures, though they're great at executing, are terrible at sensing the world and adapting to it and capitalizing upon the opportunities that are there. And so I help them figure out how to do that. That's kind of what I'm good at. And one of the main insights there, which is, I don't think it's phrased this way all the time in San Francisco, but people in San Francisco tend to be very aware of it. And I describe it as constrain risks so that you can take risks. It mirrors that model of trust we were talking about earlier. If you can constrain the size of a risk, then you're free to take a risk. If you can make it so that, wow, if I fail, it ain't going to hurt so bad because you only took a tiny risk, then you're free to fail. And the only way you're ever going to figure out what's going on in a world that's shifting very rapidly is lots of tiny failures, right? You have to try things to see what works. And the key here, they call it lean startup, they call it, whatever. It comes out of Toyota, basically, in terms of business model stuff. But the key concept is, hey, if you want to be able to thrive in a world that's changing quickly, figure out how you can minimize the size of a risk so that you are free to take lots of them. So that you are willing to give other people the freedom to take lots of risks, right? And eventually somebody will gain some experience and they'll go, hey, there's an opportunity here, right? There's something right here. We can see it. And then you take a little bit bigger risk there. You find a new way to constrain the size of risk, but you're focusing in on that opportunity. And you repeat that cycle over.
Does this loop back into sort of the trust-building relationship of handing off people little bits of vulnerability and trust? And it's an iterative cycle that grows upon itself?
Absolutely. 100%.
Sorry if I took your thunder away from the point you were going to.
No, that's what I want. Because when you summarize stuff, you'll say it in a way that I'm not saying it, or you'll distill it down to the nugget. That's why I prefer to do conversations to share these ideas, right? My way of describing this stuff, I've done it 10,000 times probably at this point, because I talk to everybody I meet about something related to this giant ball of philosophy and information architecture and, but every time something different comes out. And for me, some of these, there are definitely phrases that I said earlier that I've said 100 times. So for me, they're like old hat. But you'll come at it with a perspective and ask a question that will pull an additional insight or tie two pieces together in a way that I hadn't done before, or that ends up being really useful for others. But my way of wanting to structure this stuff is, let's do conversations, let's record them. I want to share those with the world, and I want to invite others to cut them up, make a copy, cut it up, take this piece, share that, take these pieces and string them together, write up an article, whatever. But I'm not going to have the ability to synthesize all this, because that's not, like, I'm trying to do that at one level, but at another level, it's just too much work. And I get paid internally, I get paid like here, like getting high on the exploration side, on the
intrinsic benefit.
The intrinsic rewards for me come from the exploration and the finding a new articulation that is clear and that resonates. And so you see somebody's eyes light up and they go, oh, I get it. I love that. That happens in conversation.
Yep, you like to share.
It doesn't happen for me when I write. When I write that, I don't get the eyes lighting up. They might light up for somebody, but I didn't get to see that. So it doesn't pay in the same way. So, yeah. I know you've got to go to class in a minute. I do want to dive into the architecture stuff. That might be a longer conversation.
Do you want to save that for another conversation? Because we kind of came to a good, little bit of a closer point.
I think you're right. I think that's the way to do it. Let's connect up again soon. So here's I'll wrap up with sort of what I'm doing right now.
Mm-hmm.
I'm spending the next few days preparing my vehicle and my house and everything so that I can go to Mexico on a road trip, chasing surf and doing recordings like this and taking photos and writing little blog posts. Basically in pursuit of some vulnerability. I'm pretty heady. I'm an abstract thinker. I'm a systems thinker. And so it would be natural for me to share this stuff in a very academic way. And I think academia, while it's useful for getting to real good clarity, academia is not useful for getting widespread understanding. And
there's a lot of personal sentiment in this with you as well. You share a lot of stories of things and the way you're feeling, and you expose vulnerabilities. Which is not suitable for academia as much.
Yeah, it's literally unacceptable behavior in that context. My goal, I'm right now. 2 years ago, I started a community called Build the Collaborative Internet. I met some people, a guy named Harlan Wood, another guy named Jack Seneschal, another guy named Scott Albritton, and a few other people. And I was like, oh my God, there's other people who are trying to build the same stuff I'm trying to build, and they see it the same way I see it. Okay, let's pull them together. And this was literally like a couple of months after Corwin died. And within that time period, I was meeting all these people, and I was like, okay, we need to pull it together. And it took me until February to actually hold the first meeting. But I did, and we did a weekly meetup. Tuesday nights, build the collaborative internet. It was this come together and talk group, basically. And it was great. Like, all of a sudden, it was this little, like, nexus that everybody who was interested in that, they found all the other people that were interested and they dragged them to it. So
are you still doing it?
At the moment, I'm not, but I'm going to be rebooting it soon. But it was a group of mostly technologists, computer scientists, etc. And there's that group. There's other communities that are working on this stuff. There's like a whole like ecosystem of this stuff going on right now. The Bitcoin world is a lot of that. And it's really blossomed over the last few years, to be honest, right? So that was 2.5 years ago, and the world is very different now. Like, our awareness of privacy on a mainstream level is different. The awareness of things like Bitcoin and like all of that stuff is just a different place. That said, that's a technologist's world. And the stuff I'm trying to do, I think that my role, the thing that I will be good at is, on one level, articulating this and sharing it with the world more generally. But on another level, I think that what I'm good at is building bridges. So part of the reason I've been doing the corporate work for the last couple of years is because I believe that building those networks, building networks with the people at the top of government and the top of technology and the top of enterprise will be fruitful for helping to bootstrap these systems into place. Because those people have resources and they're willing to pay for coordination problems to be solved. I have this community of technologists who is building the tools to solve really complicated coordination problems, and I can be a bridge between those, right? So that's, I do the corporate stuff because I really enjoy that too, and it pays, so that keeps the bills paid, but it's also with this objective of, hey, that's gonna help us bootstrap, these things into existence. And it's gonna be in the—
Can we wrap up in about a minute, Matt? I gotta run to class.
Yeah, absolutely. So the long story short is, that's great, but that's a community of technologists. Can you mute yourself for the last minute? That's great, but that's a community of technologists. We need wider support. And so what I'm doing right now is I'm starting a movement called Collaborative, CLLBRTV. That's collaborative without any vowels. And that movement is basically going to be a mainstream movement in support of this new form of regulation that I'm advocating. This new form of information systems-based regulation that I'm not alone in advocating this stuff. I'm just trying to create a little brand around it so that we can help communicate it more clearly to a much wider audience. And so basically, I'm going down to embrace vulnerability, to try to write in ways that aren't heady and smart and all that, but in ways that are vulnerable and emotional and that give the story and the hit you in the gut stuff where you're like, yeah, that's totally right. I feel that, as opposed to the technical details of how the protocol is going to work. I want to do that work too, and I'll be doing some of that. But this trip to Mexico is basically an opportunity for me to practice interviewing friends and sharing these ideas in the ways that I am with you today, in ways that are emotional and resonate, hopefully, in order to build a movement. I want to build a mainstream movement to bring in a much larger population to go, yes, that's the world I want, and I'm going to stand behind it. If they just say that, that's one thing. That results in some political will. If they're like, I'll buy the t-shirt, that's another thing. If they're like, I want to invest in that project, or I want to connect those people with this guy over here, all of those are ways to contribute and become part of that community. But I'm trying to build a community. And I think the first step is to step away from the heady academic stuff and into essentially pop. If there's pop songs, I want to spend some time I want to create pop songs that are about this. I'm trying to collaborate with musicians. I want to collaborate with filmmakers. I want to collaborate with dancers. I want to collaborate with storytellers. And I don't want it to be just my voice, right? I think that if I use this voice the right way, I can make it so that all these other people are able to use their voice too. And that will result in way better than if I had tried to do it myself. So my next month is basically an attempt to surf and get some big waves and get in shape for winter, because Maverick season is coming and it's looking like it's going to be big, and I am not in shape yet. And I'm not disciplined enough to go get in the pool every day. So I'm going to go surf big waves in Mexico. And while I'm there, I'm going to try to do a whole bunch more of these conversations. And that's it.
Cool. Well, I'm totally open to do another one with you.
We will try to do, between now and me crossing the border, let's try to get that systems architecture conversation in, and we'll go from there.
And I'll make sure I actually have a room reserved so it's a little bit more of a stable environment.
No worries, buddy. Michael, thank you so much for the opportunity. I honestly feel like this is one of the better sharings of at least this part of the story that I've done. So I'm definitely going to share this on the blog and elsewhere. And please, you're free to share it and invite people to do whatever they want with it. So thank you, sir.
Absolutely. I enjoyed hearing everything. So we'll reconnect.
Okay, more soon. And the next time I'm going to ask you to ask questions, because those will help me dive into all the details. You know, to really go, wait, I don't understand this. Those are really useful because they help me articulate all those pieces. Thank you, buddy. Bye.